Sensei Tesshin, we now hand it over to you. Thanks so much for speaking with us. Gasho and welcome.
Thank you, Fusats, and thank you for the reminder. I had my scheduling off and was thinking it was a different night, not tonight. So I was enjoying television with my family. The discussion tonight is based on the idea of opinions. And we know in our present society in North America, whether you're in Canada or the United States, and probably pretty much similar around the world, that many people are very attached to their opinions. And I thought it might be useful as part of this retreat to take a look at what some of our Zen ancestors have said about opinion down through time. During the last retreat in the spring, it was recommended that I practice merciful brevity. So you can consider the first 20 minutes as me having practiced that, I guess. If we go all the way back to Shakyamuni Buddha, it starts with a debater coming to him. In Hindu culture, debate was very important, and whoever won the debate was considered as having the deepest truth. And so a debater by the name of Pasura comes to Shakyamuni and Sangha in order to debate. And Shakyamuni says, Pasura, there's nothing for you here. And he says, the wise do not have a view which they are trying to defend. And so the whole thing, sort of like the Gordian knot, where someone takes a sword and just cuts through the middle of it and says, there, it's untied. It reframes the entire situation. And instead of looking at who's winning the debate, who's losing the debate, it looks at debate, examines debate critically. And later in the Pasura Sutra, and you can find this online, most of the English translations of the sutras can be found on a site. And if you can't find it, just let me know, and I'll be happy to send you the website. Later, Shakyamuni says, when someone wins the debate, I'm paraphrasing here, then they go off and they act in a haughty manner. And that does not benefit them because others look at them and see this haughtiness, not too impressed. And the person who loses the debate, Shakyamuni said, goes off feeling dejected, and that doesn't seem to benefit them either. So the question is, who benefits from a debate? And we could say, well, if we're really sincerely trying to get to the deepest truth, maybe someone will benefit. But if the focus is on winning and losing, then we can see how not much is gained there. So that's pretty countercultural to what we see in society, in politics, in social media. Social media, one of the problems being discussed in recently is this fact that it funnels people in a certain direction where they're in an echo chamber, hearing their own opinions bounced back at them. And whereas in Zen, the saying is point the finger of doubt back at yourself, or examine critically your own view of things. So that's the beginning of in Zen, sort of countercultural look at opinion. Then later on, Kanshi Sozan, which is the third Chinese patriarch. So we have Bodhidharma bringing his understanding from India to China. His student Huiko would be the second Chinese patriarch, and then following him would come Kanshi Sozan. And his famous tract called Sin Sin Ming, or Faith Mind. In it, he starts off by saying, the Great Way is not difficult. All you need to do, and again, I'm paraphrasing, is not hold an opinion for or against anything. Now, if we examine that carefully, what he's saying is not something you hear in everyday society. It's not something you hear from your parents. It's not something you hear from your teachers in school. I mean, think about it. The Great Way is not difficult. All you need to do is not hold opinions for or against anything. You know, so the question that comes to my mind, am I supposed to not hold an opinion for or against Hitler in the Second World War? Am I supposed to not hold an opinion for or against, human torture, etc.? But it seems to me this is what he's saying. The Great Way is setting down all opinion for or against anything. I don't think he's saying we forget or have amnesia about our observations. I don't think he's saying that we're like a fence post, dumb to everything. But what he's saying doesn't seem to jive very well with what we see in our culture. And then, so bear with me. I'm going to use one other example and then come back to why I think this is worth looking at. Then we come down to Master Dogen in the 13th century, who goes to China, has an experience under his teacher, Nyojo, brings his understanding back to Japan and founds Soto Zen in Japan. And if we look at Master Dogen's first tract, which he wrote for his students, Fukan Zazengi, within it we see him saying, in practicing Zazen, and again I'm paraphrasing, in practicing Zazen, set down all everyday concerns. So with Master Dogen, it's focused on our Zazen practice. And that's where I'd like to focus on this evening with this discussion. If we're sitting down in Zazen and trying to be still enough, long enough, as Abbot Elliston has reminded us many, many times, what are some of the things where we're going to, or what are the ways in which we're going to be getting in our own way or interfering with our own practice? It seems to me if Master Dogen took the time to say, set down all everyday concerns, he must have considered it important. If the third patriarch in China said, set down all opinions for or against anything, he must have considered it important. If Buddha, Shakyamuni said, there's nothing here for you, Pastor. We don't debate. We don't cling to an opinion one way or the other on things. They must have considered it important. So if we're sitting there, think of how much time you could spend sitting in Zazen or elsewise during your regular day, clinging to your opinions. In fact, I would encourage us all as we sit to examine what comes to mind. If we've said, okay, I will sit here and I will be still, and then the mind is not still, stuff bubbles up, to examine critically the nature of that. Is it clinging to some form of view? And is that clinging actually interfering with us being still? Is it, in fact, a way of propping up our sense of self? So that's what I have to say to start with. The floor is open. And Fusatsu, are you sort of calling on people to speak, or am I supposed to?
Myself and Cosettes will have the wandering eye for you, for folks for questions, of course.
Okay, thank you.
Again, as always,
And, and,
pleasure.
and they shouldn't be limited to just questions. You may have observations of what you've seen as you sit down in Zazen practice, or what you've seen in your everyday life that speaks to this. And so what you have to say may be very helpful to somebody else. So please don't hesitate to share your observations. This is not just a one-person talk. It's a discussion between us all.
I see Tesshin Tessin took himself off of mute. Gotcha.
Yeah, by accident. No, I guess I better ask something. Actually, as you were going through, and I thank you, Tesshin, for laying something so, I think, critical to our practice, to laying it out so clearly in terms of what our ancestors have said on this is extremely valuable. I'm curious if you ever ran across something as you were looking at this material. I'm not sure that this is accurate, is that after the death of Shakyamuni Buddha, this tradition of having people come in and debate, that was very much endemic to the society, and actually Hindu priests and scholars would come to Buddhist temples and monasteries and engage in this, and whoever got the upper hand was then the guiding teacher from that point on. And that as being really the decline of Buddhism in India was re-engaging in this old custom, leading to the decline of Buddhism in India. I'm not sure if you
I'm
have
not
run across something like that.
I'm not familiar with what happened then, but it's pretty clear in the Prasura Sutra what Shakyamuni's view was on debate. But what happened afterwards, I'm not a historical scholar, so I'm not sure.
Hojo Sensei.
Yeah, I just want to add a couple of comments by 14th Patriarch Nagarjuna, 14th ancestor in India. The public debate had been evolved to a very high level, and they were the prasangikas, majjhimikas. They made no assertions, as Tesshin was pointing out, that we don't have opinions, we're not debating opinions, but they would demolish your assertions. So the pundits would come and engage in these public debates. And it's interesting to, as Tesshin was saying, looking at what we call debate today is kind of a mudslinging contest, but the motivation behind the debates that Nagarjuna and his bunch held in middle in the transmission through India. He was 14th and then Bodhidharma was 28th. The whole idea was to pull a rug out from under your opponent in terms of their assertions, everything they're basing their argument on. And so they had to come to a kind of cognitive dissonance in which they had the possibility of having a realization of the Buddha's truth. So it was extremely high level, like motive. It wasn't to win the debate at all. It was to help the other person debating from what they considered an ignorant or limited perspective to come to the more non-dualistic view that they were coming from. Again, they did not make assertions, so they were there to respond and listen and feed back. And so it's a very compelling idea. And I think when you go back to Tesshin's first statements about it was Shakyamuni, it was Dogen, who was in between? Who was the second one? It was,
Kanshi Sozan, the third
yeah,
Chinese patriarch.
Song San, Kanshi Sosan. I think we have to keep in mind that what they're saying when they say, set aside all everyday concerns, do not think neither good nor evil, and right and wrong. And you bring up Hitler and Tojo and, all the insanity that we see in the world. They are pointing at your attitude and your experience in Zazen. And when we rise from the cushion and we re-enter and re-engage society, there's good and evil everywhere. You have to deal with that on all sides. But what they're coaching us to do is when we sit in Zazen, suspend that judgmental mind. Don't, beat yourself up with these kind of ideas when you're in meditation, because that's going to get in the way of your progress, so to speak. But certainly when you then re-engage society, you cannot use these teachings of Buddhism as a cop-out for not taking action when there is injustice. Buddha in the Jataka tales was known for killing other people when he had to. So I think this is a general, common misinterpretation and confusion, that the instructions which are given essentially for Zazen, or when you are engaging yourself in your own personal meditation, trying to come to terms with reality for yourself, we conflate and confuse those with philosophical attitudes about society. They're not the same. So Buddha had teachings for prosperity teachings. He had teachings for lay people, how husbands should treat their wives, how wives should treat their husbands, and so forth. And he had a lot of teachings around war, the principles of war, whether to engage war, what it means, and so forth. But these instructions that you're citing are really about the personal level of confrontation of Bodhidharma in the cave by himself. So this it comes down to Dogen's 4 transitions: study the way, study the self, forget the self, actualized by the myriad things, body and mind drop away, and so forth. The last line is often interpreted as remove the barrier between self and other, go on in traceless enlightenment forever. So many people interpret that as remove the barrier between self and others, plural, go on in ceaseless enlightenment forever, on kind of a social level. But what that is actually teaching is remove the barrier between self and other, sitting in a cave alone by yourself. Or resolve the contradiction between self and other, and then all other relationships will fall into place from that. So I think we have to be very clear to create an intentional bifurcation between what we call Zazen, when we're focusing like a laser on this in our own meditation, and Zen practice, when we go from the cushion into engagement in society. The teachings from the compassionate instructions for how to approach your own Zazen do not carry over whole cloth into how you relate to society. So there's no teaching in Buddhism that says to suspend judgment of good and evil when you have something like Hitler happening, or in what we're looking at today politically. We cannot use Buddhism as a cop-out for not engaging and doing what we can about injustice. But when you're on the cushion, you have to set that all aside. This is my interpretation.
Sensei Sengak.
Gasho Tesshin. I was thinking along the lines of bracketing in psychology and psychiatry. To bracket something is simply to hold it in suspension, neither gaining nor losing, simply observing it. And in that observation, it begins to change. So I think my listening to you is that I was thinking about impermanence. And if we, for example, on the cushion or off the cushion, feel that we have nothing to learn, that we are the know-all and be-all, that is existentialist holding, that is existentialist death in regards to any interconnectivity or anything else we can do. I think in terms that leads to somewhat of a dead end. And I was thinking about, I think it was Mel Weissman who said that Buddha had opinions. But to have an opinion is not to assume that it is the only one, or that is the right one, or that it is honest, because we still are developing these things. So I like what you said toward the end, as I look at my own practice on the cushion, I am meeting my own self, and we're having quite a debate sometimes about what is going on with this entity. On the other side, I think in terms of the interconnectivity with other people, and here the emphasis is on listening and participating as harmonically as we can. For me personally, I always get trapped in a bit of anger arising. And in the anger arises, I sense that I am too close to my own opinion. And it takes some time for me to back off, for example, some space, some pausing, in order for this to clear. The wonderful thing for me about sitting Zazen is that I sat long enough, as you were saying, still enough, and sometimes even quiet enough, that all of this works itself out. This begins to fall away. So then and both of you have said, now I'm off the cushion and I'm out talking to people on a Zoom conference. Wow, I'm being bombarded with a lot of different things. It is quite an opportunity if I have been somewhat open to what I really go through in my life, particularly on the cushion, then I'm a little bit more receptive. I can pause, I can let other things occur. As you said in the very beginning, I think the idea of dukkha, or the idea of suffering, or a misunderstanding, or dis-ease, or out of sorts, all of these things sometimes lead us to believe that we know exactly how to solve it for the other person. That kind of opinion, I think, does not work well, and is not the essence of Buddhism or Zen, as you rightly spoke. So I think it's a great way of approaching me on the cushion and understanding what self is and letting that go, not holding on or clinging to that. And then we get out into the world and do that. We do that with compassion and with some experience of that we can talk about. Not so much the opinion of its impact, but simply the experience that we've had when these types of topics arise. So as always, you're turning up some areas for me that can always stand some more sitting.
The, the focus, it seems like trying to change others to suit our own view is what everybody in society is trying to do. Hence the disharmony. The focus for the talk tonight is when we're actually sitting in Zen, are we getting in our own way? And I'm just suggesting that some of our ancestors, Shakyamuni, Kanshi Sozan, uh, Master Dogen, have recommended that, yes, we are getting in our own way. And their suggestions are aimed at how to sort of stop getting in our own way quite so much.
Did I see Hokashi? Was that a wave that you had up, or was that you stretching? Okay, all right. For sure, I saw Sensei Zenku's
Yeah.
hand.
Very good. No, a wonderful debate, discussions today. I appreciate it very much. One time I was fortunate enough, I went to Tibet, I went to Lhasa, and so I got to tour around a little bit. And one afternoon, we went to a Buddhist monastery, Tibetan Buddhist monastery, and they were in a little yard. There were trees all around. It was really charming, and they were all in this little yard with trees everywhere. And there were maybe a couple of dozen students that were debating each other, and so this was part of their practice, and just in line with what Hojo expressed around debating, and it wasn't that they were arguing about opinions, they were trying to give a new perspective and kind of open up people's opinions and ideas about things in a very constructive way. And I, in a way, when I saw that, Dharma combat, which we are familiar with in our tradition, I think is very akin. Even though with Dharma combat, often a student comes to the teacher with a question, and then there's dialogue. But this is kind of the nature of what these Tibetan monks were doing. And it was for their kind of growing their perspective, opening up their mind. And it was quite unique and wonderful to see, actually. They they said that you could enter into the debate yourself. Sometimes they invite people who are spectators, but everybody was speaking Tibetan, so that wasn't really an option that day for me. But it was really wonderful to see and very validating of what has been said, I think. I also think that to Tessen's point earlier about why did Buddhism uh, ultimately come to its demise mostly in India, I do think that the validity of it is Hindu uh, sensibilities is highly intellectual, highly intellectual. It comes from their language, it comes from their culture going back centuries. And I do think that ultimately that intellectualism may have had a way of dampening enthusiasm for Buddhism. I just throw that out as a speculation, kind of a feeling on my part. And so it could have been interpreted in the way, Tessen, that you had kind of expressed it, in that maybe too much intellectualism, too much debating kind of thing in the temple. And it may have, that might have been a champion and led to the demise of Buddhism. But in general, I think that this is a wonderful debate. And I certainly agree that what we are reading from our teachers about their advice applies to Zazen. Because if our minds are out of control, and they're just racing about and we're jumping all around, we are no good for ourselves or anybody else. The first thing we have to do is clarify ourselves. And then when we go out into the world, we're in a much better position to do what's right and take care of what is going on most skillfully.
Did I hear you say this is a wonderful debate?
I did say that, yes.
Since
No
Debate is,
comment. No comment.
stretch our thinking on debate. What is debate? Is it debate only when we decide who's going to win and who's going to lose? Or is it debate just sharing ideas?
That's all Hojo's
Just a,
hand.
yeah, just a brief comment. There's a recent news item in India, which I don't know if you know Abhilash Nambiar. He's one of our members out of the Nashville Zen Center. And there was a government move by Modi to bring Buddhism back and to promote the practice of Buddhism. So it's highly suspect, but you know, who knows what's actually behind it.
Sensei, I would like to just comment because this is a theme that keeps running through a lot of the practices that we're having. We're currently reading Dropping Ashes on the Buddha on Monday night, and we just got through opening the Hand of Thought as well. And what comes up again was this idea of working with discriminating mind, and really working with, they, again, letting go of opinion, but again, as I always say, not checking your brain at the door. So at the same time, recognizing and having the things arise in your mind. But, from my perspective, I didn't recognize that I was really having opinions about everything until I started practicing, and I wonder how that is for others on the call as they started their practice or are continuing their practice, that your mind goes to the constant, trying to make an opinion and thoughts arising at every single thing we think is kind of exhausting. But once you recognize that you're doing it, right, then that's when you can recognize the things that are arising, and maybe like Sensei Sengak talked about, get some space in between it, just enough so you maybe can use some discriminating or discernment with things that arise to figure out when we need, in the real world, to actually do or not to do, or say or not to say. So I really appreciated you bringing that back up, because for me, it's about what is arising individually in our individual practice as well as our Sangha practice. And, I would love to hear if some others have worked with this as well, because this for me is a thing that keeps arising, working with your opinions, being so attached to your opinions and things of that nature. So I just want to throw that out there. And Sensei, thank you for bringing this this back up into our conversation.
If you look at the skandhas in the Heart Sutra, there's form, and then sensation, perception, formation, and consciousness. And formation can also be translated as intention. So my question would be, as people are observing what bubbles up in Zazen, do you see any pattern in terms of the intention? What is the intention? If this thing is bubbling up, and I've said, I'm going to sit here and be still, and this thing is bubbling up, what is the intention underneath this thing that's bubbling up? Are there patterns there, I would ask?
And I saw Mokyo's hand up.
Thank you very much, Sensei Tesshin. It's always wonderful to hear you. Fusat sparked something in me. I had been practicing at the Zendo for, I don't know, maybe a month, maybe more than a month. And I wasn't, it was hard. It was hard to sit for that length of time for me in the beginning. It was really hard, physically and mentally. I would sit down and I would see myself running away. And I didn't quite know how I felt about the whole thing. And I was at work one day and I was walking across the campus and I was going to a meeting and things were on my mind. And, I had an agenda. And as I was walking across the campus, the thought came to me that, well, Nancy, that's just your opinion. It doesn't mean it's right. It doesn't mean it's wrong. It doesn't mean it's valid. It's just your opinion. And then I knew why I was sitting. That's when I was sold. To speak to what Sensei Tesshin just asked, what keeps bubbling up for me on the cushion, and I think it's self-protection. I think it's, justifications and all those things. That don't really do me any good, that aren't really useful to me or for others. And they come up, and I have to look at them. But it's a lot around self-protection. Gasho.
Me too.
Hojo Sensei, do you have your hand raised?
Well, I wouldn't say it's my hand, but I just wanted to ask Tesshin to comment on Matsuoka Roshi when we would gather around the table and have tea and do his imitation of Matsuoka Roshi talking about opinion. He does a wonderful, he lays out, it shows Matsuoka Roshi's understanding of this subject that Tesshin has raised here. So Tesshin, you're on.
This was definitely replaying sort of in the back of my mind as I was listening here. So thank you, Roshi. Yeah, after the Zen service, we have tea in the back room, and everybody can ask questions and so forth. And some people were not that interested in asking questions. They were much more highly focused on sharing their important insights on life and Zen, and just really making sure everyone understood just how, intelligent, how wise, this person is. It really rubbing their ego, and Matsuoka Roshi would listen very impassively, but very intently. The person gets to the end, and his response was, just your opinion. Just your opinion. No further discussion was necessary. So.
I see Keiko and then Ikuse.
So yes, this topic is something that weighs a lot to me as well, and I'm really glad I could join. So we discuss about no separation of self and other, and so we go out into the world, and there is good and evil that we need to fight of. But then, if we say there's no separation of us to other, we could be the extension of good or evil, right? And then that turns around to my choices, small to large, kind of weighs in, overwhelms me sometimes. So this might be, might stir up some in a way, but living here as a foreigner, and I see political divides in the country, almost 50-50. And I wonder if Dogen saw, or our ancestors would see, what their thought would be. Sorry.
Do you think it was any more harmonious when Dogen was alive?
Not true. It wouldn't be.
It was
Yeah,
it was
perhaps
it was
it's
a
always
time
the same.
it was a time of warlords fighting for power to be shogun. Human nature hasn't changed much, has it?
Right. So when we talk about non-judgment and no division, when we see injustice, we kind of feel that we're part of it because there's no separation
I see
of us and
injustice
other.
when I sit down to have breakfast. I might, even if it's a bowl of oatmeal, what's the justice for the oat seed that got squashed between the metal wheels to get turned into rolled oats in order to feed me? It didn't want to feed me. If we examine this critically, if I go out fishing, generally Buddhists don't fish. There's the vow you take, do not kill. So if I go out fishing and I catch a bass, from the bass's point of view, I'm in the same category as Hitler. From the minnows in the same pond, from their point of view, I'm the great savior. I just removed a murderous bully that's been killing them one after the other every day, day after day, week after week, month after month. So if I catch a bass, am I good or am I bad? We start examining this critically, we see this is a lot fuzzier than we thought it was. And as you've just pointed out so beautifully, we are part of it. We're not separate. We're in the midst of this stew.
So yes, it's overwhelming, but it's really the reality, and that's us, right? So
I think that was the motivating factor that caused Shakyamuni to sit still enough long enough.
Carla.
Before Carla, Ikuse, and then Carla.
Oh,
Sorry.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Yes.
One something that I'm realizing as I sit more or have sat continue to sit and eventually sit longer than I had before is stripped of these ideas, some of them, and certainly opinions. What am I? Who am I? What's there when that mind isn't going off, shooting off into one concept or perhaps impetuous or angry thought? So who's there? What's there? What's left?
What do you find is left? So if the self-defensive posturing and daydreams and fantasies are set down, what is there left?
I would say that what is left is for me to experience the frontier of existence.
If nothing else, we can certainly say a lot of space opens up when you're not filling your time trying to defend yourself.
Gasho.
Yep. Carla?
Greetings, Sangha. Thank you so much for this conversation. I don't know, I guess when I was listening to the way in which the grain in the field didn't want to offer itself as food, and that sort of generated an opinion. Because you know, I've been thinking about this a lot lately, as you know, this idea. Somebody, if it was this talk or some other talk, someone was talking about how you are either on the line or you're in the practice, and the hesitations that come up. So, working on this idea of veganism or vegan eating styles. And then, you know, my mind starts thinking about the Western culture, which if you're in the Christian world, you know, well, white men have dominion over everything, whether it's fish or beef or oats or women or, you know, the earth in general. And so, you know, kind of trying to think about, well, what is the difference if I choose to, you know, eat meat or not eat meat, aside from the precept, decide not to kill or to kill, and I think there's this notion of kind of getting lost in it a little bit from too much assessment or analysis or what have you. And then, you know, in the Crooked Cucumber or Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, I can't remember which one, you know, the story of where they had to go out and unbury the food that they buried and they had to eat it. Do you guys remember the story? So anyhow, the way that we eat is, and what, in my opinion about foods, you know, is it something that I need to be more loosely holding, or is it, you know, something that really is a path that needs to be followed? And so, as I often talk, it's sort of circular, and, you know, so the question I have is, you know, if I'm doing a vegan approach, and I happen to be sitting down at somebody's house and they serve me a big, huge steak, even though they know that, you know, I'm doing this Buddhist walk, and they happen to be codependent, dysfunctional alcoholics, you know, family members who are, you know, there's these sort of tentacles that keep going. And it's, for me, I guess what I'm saying is not easy. It's not a line that's cut and dry that you can see all the time. And it changes from moment to moment and situation to situation. And I was just going to post, I'm going to stop talking, but I was just going to post on my Facebook page, hey, is COVID over yet? You know, because this is a big opinion base that we're in right now. So thank you.
Discussing food, we know that if you study energy flow, if the grain is eaten by a cow and then the cow is eaten by a person, then not as much energy gets to the person as if the grain was eaten directly by the person. It's about a 1/10, 10% flow. So you can feed about 10 times as many vegetarians on the same size piece of land as you can meat eaters. The data is all in on that. So just in terms of sharing the world, it makes sense to try to be frugal with how much we're taking for ourselves. And certainly if someone is eating mostly vegetarian, they're going to require a lot less land to keep them sustained. And so the fact, if you look at many countries where there's been crowding for long periods of time, you'll notice they eat mostly vegetables with maybe small bits of fish or meat in there. And so, yes, that certainly makes sense. Anybody who feels that white men are dominant over everything has never lived with my wife. I don't think you can group it quite that way.
No, I just meant that from a cultural perspective, from a Christian perspective, the way in which the opinions are generated over time in the US or Western have to do with a biblical perspective of the man has dominion over earth and all of the creepy crawly critters and everything else. And so it's that perspective that creates these sort of pathways that we see. And so, you know, I don't, it's important that it's not put into sort of a joke, because, you know, it informs our thinking and it informs how, you know, the Western people approach their right to not feed human beings, but feed animals grain. It informs it. And so, you know, I just, you know, it's not a simple thing. That's all I'm saying. And to be able
Agreed.
to live in a space where you actually take the risk. So, you know, I could have this opinion that, you know, dominion over everything is ridiculous. And that belief is underlying, you know, all sorts of behaviors, and then just not say anything. But I could also take the stance of trying to skillfully state something, as I'm trying to do here. I don't know how skillful I'm being, but I'm bringing up something, you know, because it's easy to minimize something and make a joke out of it. But we're in a serious moment, I think, where if I'm remaining silent, or if I go to, you know what I'm saying, there's just lots of meat to eat. And the opinion is that's the right thing to do. So anyhow, I'm going to stop now because I'm new to this. Y'all don't know me very much. And I'm starting to say y'all because I'm living here in middle Georgia. I'm from LA.
I agree. And there's no question in terms of, you know, what demographic has held the reins of power over time in different places and presently. And yet, when I look around at the people I know, I see cooperation, for instance, between spouses. And when I think back of my grandparents, my parents, my uncles and aunts, etc. Again, it didn't seem like it seemed like a cooperation between the two. Yes, there was a division of labor, and certainly women did not do some jobs and men did not do some jobs. But somehow I think our modern society right now is posing a reality that I've never observed as being quite the way it's being posed. And so my cautionary point is that I think we need to, just like when we're sitting in Zazen, we examine very critically and very carefully what is bubbling up and what we're doing with that, because we all know, everyone here, how easy it is to indulge in anger, to indulge in anxiety. It wouldn't be called indulging in anxiety, but to beat ourselves with anxiety, etc. So we examine very carefully because we're trying to not be unfriendly with ourselves. We're trying to not interfere with our own practice or our own progress, we might say. So similarly, I think we should use those same careful, discriminatory, critical powers to examine things in our society as well. And as you're saying, and as others have said tonight, certainly it's not using Zen as an excuse to go run and hide in a hole, not do our share to try to make for a just society. In fact, I think it goes in the other direction when we're not trying to defend ourselves or protect ourselves quite so much in our habitual ways, that we actually can start seeing a little more clearly what is exactly going on, and maybe doing or saying a thing or two that actually is of help, rather than what we've done in the past habitually, which tended to be shoot ourselves in the foot or shoot others in the face.
And we see Hojo Sensei that you have your hand up, but I want to do a quick time check because we're at 8:13, and I think this will probably be the last comment before we transition back and do our closing Dharma verse.
Yeah, I just wanted to support a little bit both views. I was raised in a pretty matriarchal family. Grandmothers, mothers, and so forth seemed to be really very dominant and in terms of the direction of the family, et cetera, et cetera. But I think we have to also remember in this context the power of what we call a corporation, that we have corporate entities now. They're influencing things. And once you have a corporate entity that is recognized as an individual and has rights and so forth, you've got a real nightmare on your hands. And I think the sort of promulgation and continuation of the dominance forces in society, we have to look at it as a kind of a corporate phenomenon. So it's almost like we've created monsters, and they're called corporations.
So, Sensei Tesshin, we'd ask that, for any closing remarks or comments. And again, thank you so much for your teaching and your knowledge.
Yes, I would only add to what Hojo has said, that when we started examining the corporations, I have a friend who is an investment consultant, and it's quite different than my life was as a school marm teaching grade 5. And when we start to examine it, one thing that has crossed my mind is an awful lot of people are looking for easy money. Someone has more money than they need, so they put it in an investment. And that investment might buy something like real estate. And then the price of real estate goes up. And then a young person who needs a home has to pay a price. When I bought my first house, it was $25,000. That same house today would sell for $125,000 or more. And so the investments, the corporations, those are us. There are people with retirement plans that are based on these corporations and these investments. So it's not a boogeyman that's separate from us. This is us. The government is us. The corporations are us. And yes, there are different people that have different amounts of money to invest toward that. People who have no money to invest at all. And certainly, as we can all see in the modern discussion, those who are privileged and have more need to start examining this stuff critically. But I think all of us need to examine the fact that this is us doing this to us. And so the idea of easy money should be examined critically. In my view, there is no such thing. It may be easy for one person, but somebody else is paying on the other end. And this needs to be examined critically. As Carla has pointed out, even the idea of our food. There is no cheap steak. There is no cheap bag of carrots in the store. I can remember being in the store and looking at the price of a bag of carrots and thinking to myself, if I was the farmer who raised these carrots, how much would I be charging? And it was about 3 times what the price was in the store. And the farmer didn't get much of it. They tend to get the least compared to the store owner, etc. So yeah, these are all questions. None of it is separate from Zen practice. And I think it tends to go in the direction where it makes us uncomfortable. And that's probably a very good thing.
Again, thank you for your teaching, Sensei. Big gacho, everyone, and thank you for that.